Hello, my name is Gianfranco Cecconi. I'm part of the team that runs the European Union Support Center for Data Sharing, and I'm here today with Elena Simperl, an old acquaintance of mine from the University of Southampton. Elena, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Gianfranco. We're here in Helsinki on a rainy afternoon talking about one of the most exciting topics in data and AI in the last decade and probably the next decade to come, which is access to data and data sharing. I'm Elena Simperl. I'm a professor of computing at the University of Southampton in the UK. I'm here because for the last 3 years I've been leading a Horizon 2020 initiative called Data Pitch. Data Pitch has brought together data holders, organizations in the public and the private sectors that have huge amounts of interesting, valuable data sets that they would want to exploit for their benefit, but also to achieve broader impact. So to bring together these organizations with people who have ideas about novel products, services, approaches to solve data-driven challenges. And so in a way, Data Pitch in the last 3 years showcased how one could facilitate data sharing in a very specific context. So our focus is on open innovation. So we are not just bringing together data holders and startups in a sort of contracting or supplier-buyer kind of relationship, but we're very interested in studying that tension between data access and data exploitation, data valuation on the one side, and the creation of sustainable businesses that are bootstrapped by having access to critical data assets at the right point in the business development. So as part of this journey, we have implemented an innovation program that is centered around data challenges. So some of these challenges are driven by a particular organization. Say the Met Office in the UK have identified specific challenges around the models they're using that they would like to solve with the help of startups and entrepreneurs, or sectoral challenges. Sectoral challenges are much broader. They are not particularly anchored into the business context of an organization, but address more general industry challenges that are important for the European economy and for Europeans. For instance, we had the Smart Manufacturing Challenge, where we were looking for interesting products and services and approaches where a startup would provide an idea for the sort of pilot that they would want to run, as well as a relationship to an existing data holder, so an organization that has accepted to share their data because they saw the value in the product or service that the startup was developed. So I think in a way the work that we've been doing is very specific because it is around those relationships between data holders and startups. And at the same time, it gave us, in this very open, emerging, rapidly evolving space, it gave us a way to start thinking about challenges and opportunities in data sharing, and we found it very valuable.
From what you describe, it seems like your focus was on the models by which organizations could share together. The European Commission is trying to study this subject against possibly 3 dimensions, one being the models, one being the technology itself, that of course it will be somewhere in all of this workflow, and the legal aspects of them. Have you had any, have you found any friction in dealing with the other parts, or have you managed to develop also those subjects in the context of Data Pitch?
I think you're right. I think these 3 components are critical in their ways. And the toolkit we have developed that we're launching here at the EBTVF definitely focuses on the model. But we have also done some very good work, I would say, and learned quite a few things along the way regarding technology and legal aspects. So you have to imagine we were negotiating with 10 plus organizations in the private sector from different European countries, while Europe was preparing for GDPR.
Oh wow!
So that was quite interesting from a legal practice point of view. I'm very happy to say that we have mastered that challenge. I am also quite confident that programs like this in a few years will have a much easier life, because no matter what people say about GDPR, it does provide a framework that unifies across various national regulations and formal and informal and laws or practices. So I think the timing for us was quite an interesting one, and for this reason, one of the main outputs of Data Pitch is a legal and privacy toolkit that is specifically geared towards data holders who want to share data in the context of a challenge or of a 6 months pilot with one or more startups, and as well as tools and resources for startups for them to understand this space. Because sometimes, and this brings me actually to the technology component, which is the third component in this triad that you mentioned. In our experience, startups, or at least the ones that applied into our program, are digitally quite advanced. The challenge that they have from a technical point of view are really around recruiting. Securing talent, finding the talent, perhaps also the never-ending story about cleansing the data and understanding what it is, but I don't think this is really something that we could solve with more technology or more integration. This is something that needs to be planned accordingly. People need to understand that they need to have access to subject matter expertise to be able to understand the data set. People need to understand that they have to have better practices in documenting what they do with the data before they give it to someone else, even if it's just another business unit in their organization. So those lessons, we knew them, but we saw them again. Regarding access to actual technology stacks or computational resources, startups were already quite advanced, and the sort of support we could give them was very, very specific. So very, very specific questions around a particular algorithm or learning technique, and then our value was really in leveraging our network and being able to find those people who have exactly that expertise. I guess in summary, the model, definitely, if you want to do open innovation, challenge-centric, this is one way you could do it. Data-wise, data and technology-wise, data access is really important. So I used to run a similar program, like an innovation or incubation program, focusing on startups, but with a stronger focus on open data. There, you could see that one of the main motivations for the companies to apply was really the funding. Here, lots of startups told us that they are there for the data, for having access to the data by a particular data holder to be able to understand and design and evolve their products. So that was really, really important, much more so than the technology. And then the legal part, absolutely, and the toolkit we've developed, which is also linked here in this document in the data sharing toolkit, is a starting point for how to do that in a pragmatic way.
What about the larger companies that contributed to the program? So you described how the startup actually perhaps were smarter in a way, more prepared on the technology side. What was friction instead for the bigger companies that contributed to this program, perhaps to the ones that offer the data for innovation to be unleashed? What were your observations there?
I think in a way we ended up working with a very biased sample of organizations, because we had a number of data holder challenges, data challenges that the businesses themselves have defined, but we have had various other conversations with perhaps twice as many organizations that for whatever reason didn't end up into a challenge. And I think that could be a space which we haven't quite explored yet, but that would be a very interesting space to understand some of these frictions. Lots of them were really non-technical. we were operating according to a timeline because of the funding we had received from Horizon 2020. So a challenge, according to the model that we have defined, takes between 6 and 12 months to complete. And by that, I mean not just defining the actual challenge that the startup would respond to, but also doing all the paperwork, the legal paperwork that is involved there. So 6 to 12 months sounds like a long time.
It does.
It does require quite a bit of prep work. It also requires contact to different parts of an organization, which are not always available. But then there are some shortcuts. So in our experience, organizations that have already been involved in open innovation, say they've organized hackathon or a datathon or a challenge or run their own innovation program with startups. If you find the right hook into that part of the business, then they will very much know what you're looking for. They speak the same language, and they see, actually, they wanted to collaborate with Database just to see a different model and how it works out.
So would you say that you need to look for the champions in the
Absolutely. But in some cases, really, we talked to technical people first. And then we had to almost insist that we bring all the different stakeholders to the table. In some cases, we had to really be very cautious about the sort of data that some of the organizations were willing to challenge, to share, to do a challenge about. In other cases, we have even provided legal and privacy toolkit resources to both sides of the innovation cycle, to make sure that not just the startups but also the data holders have a full understanding of the implications. In other cases, a good indicator was if the data is shared within an organization. That means basically that some sort of conversation has already happened around technical access, but also around data protection and privacy. And of course, our context is different because startups would have access to data that so far has been perhaps shared only internally. But nevertheless, some of the discussions were already quite advanced within the organization, and it was really a matter of them understanding what the potential added value is from being able to use the solution that the startup provides. And then there were a few other interesting cases. I mean, some organizations, some data holders ended up buying the startup.
Oh, nice.
Yeah,
for them.
so for them,
if
yeah,
that is what
absolutely.
they wanted, yeah.
So it was basically the pilot, the 6 months pilot, was a way for them to get to know each other. We've seen in many cases that the relationship between the two continued beyond these 6 months, even when they did not have a relationship before the startup entered the accelerator. So we're really happy about this because this was very, very important to us. In other cases, organizations wanted to get a sense of how valuable the data could be. So perhaps they were less interested in the solution itself, but in trying to get a sense of what can be done with the data.
They wanted to pick the brain
exactly.
of the innovators there.
Exactly, and also really have the context to put together a team internally to start working on these things, because I think lots of organizations recognize that they have to do something in this space, and lots of them have started in different parts of an organization to do something in this direction. But you know how it is. I mean, unless you have a particular context to start or a reason to start that conversation, you perhaps put it off for a while. And in some cases we had that. With Deutsche Bahn, it was also a way to understand which data sets to open next. So very, very, very interesting story as well. We had SMEs as data holders, which makes lots of sense retrospectively, but it wasn't sort of the audience that we were initially pitching at. We were going for large corporates because we thought it would be more interesting for the startups as well. SMEs, they do not have the resources to run an R&D department on their own. So and they have lots of very interesting problems. So I think going forward, that could be quite an interesting avenue as well for the European Commission to explore this sort of programs. We had startups. We had actually a very young company that was building data analytics services on top of a database that was yet underexplored. So they did not see their main business in the data, and they just wanted the data to be more widely used. What else? Oh yes, we also had existing innovation project from Horizon 2020, which saw this as an opportunity to get more impact.
Okay.
So because we're operating in a different way on a different timeline than the funding cycle, which can be quite lengthy and requires lots of decisions to be made well in advance, some of the projects just saw this as an opportunity to do something that they had identified in the middle of the project but wouldn't have the resources to do themselves. So yeah, I mean it's been interesting.
You named earlier manufacturing as one of the sectors you work with, but I seem to remember that the picture had quite a wide scope. You probably addressed most of the industries. Is it so?
Yes. We were very aware of the advantages and disadvantages of picking specific industries. And at the beginning of the project, we ran a very wide consultation, both on social media as well as through expert workshops, to try to get an understanding of what the most important sectors were. And there, it's a multidimensional problem. So you want to look at industries that are large enough for startups to be interested in. You want to look at industries that are important for Europe. You want to look at industries that are fairly advanced in digital transformation, because that was another proxy for how smooth those conversations were. So industries that are perhaps overall less advanced in their digital transformation journey. I mean, we appreciate the opportunity to educate and inform and promote these goals, but doing it on a timeline we had was quite challenging.
This sounds quite a problem in a way in developing fast this kind of capabilities across Europe. Together with this, have you noticed other patterns or characteristics of one industry in respect to another that is interesting to share?
I think it makes a huge difference whether you have user-generated content and personal data. I think it makes also a huge difference if you operate in different countries, or if your networks and business reach is national or in fact regional. I'm not saying one is better than the other. It's just that the way, the type of startups that apply to these sort of programs and the way we needed to teach them, to train them into growing their business was very different. There were some challenges that clearly had a cross-sectoral, cross-national focus. Again, that raises a few challenges as well. We have also seen some applications. I don't remember right now if we have actually any successful startups that do this in the program, but there is no correlation whatsoever. But I remember seeing quite a few startups that were operating on a national market, then saw the challenge, which was very similar to what they were doing, but in a neighboring country in Europe, and then they saw that as an opportunity to try to launch in a new European country. And we all know how challenging this is, despite all the efforts with the digital single market. So that was definitely an opportunity. So personal data, supply chains, how big the supply chains were, and how much the organization that we were talking to in that network had access to interesting data. Because one of the scenarios we haven't explored is the one that would involve more than one data holder at the same time. There is a similar initiative called the European Data Incubator. I think they have tried out something like that. So their innovation model is also pairing startups and data holders, but they're doing it in a different way. And I think they have some very interesting lessons now that I think they're in the second year now out of their third years of funding. I'm sure they've learned lots of things along the way as well.
We both deepen our roots in all the practices and theory and economies of open data, and what you describe reminded me almost straightforwardly how different this is, how more articulated it is. Open data seems like a joke, easy, right? You snap your fingers and you're done. You pick a license, you publish. This variety of options, of models that are out there, some you explored, some others hopefully we will be able to document in the context of this project. Will I found some in this nice booklet I have in front of me with the toolbox?
Probably, and I think in a way you're right. When we were talking about open data 10 years ago, and I mean you worked for the Open Data Institute for a while, and they've pioneered many of the established practices around publishing data openly in different sectors. In the same time, in my experience, we are still having very similar conversations. Say, I mentioned digital transformation earlier. The Open Data Institute, when they teach people about open data, they talk about a changing culture, not just about the specific act of identifying a data set, publishing it, adding a license to it, and so on and so forth. It's the same thing here. So many of those non-technical challenges that we have seen, lived, and experienced in the context of open data publishing, I think, apply here as well. In the same time, I think, the fact that we talk about data that is shared in a trusted environment makes some of those conversations a bit less awkward. Some data will never be published openly. And you can make an argument around transparency, you can make an argument around the value of the data and whether the public, whoever that is, has a right to access that data set. For specific types of data and sectors, you could even bring up an economic argument about the number of jobs and so on and so forth that the release of that resource would create globally. But fundamentally, there isn't always a clear link between the investment that the data publisher makes and the benefits. Yes, in many domains you see a benefit at the macroeconomic level. But in the absence of funding models that would make that investment of the data publisher sustainable, that can be sometimes a very difficult conversation, especially as organizations in the public sector start saving costs and so on and so forth. Yeah. In the same time, for shared data, you don't necessarily have to make the argument, oh, it's open for everyone, including my competitor, and you could see value. You work with a startup, or you work with a different organization, or you work with a different business unit within your organization, and you see there's fewer frictions. And you will agree with me, hopefully, that we were making the same argument for open data. We were telling publishers, look, start by using it internally. Don't open it yet. Start by using, and it's exactly the same conversation, except that you don't have to make the why do I have to open it for everyone? Yeah. Argument to them.
And building on this conversation, I want to pick your brain on something that has been a riddle for me and my team for a while. That is, in communicating open data and shared data alongside, what is best? Is it best to describe open data as an extreme kind of shared, in which you don't need to worry about confidentiality and personal data, or is it better to keep the words separate because it's difficult to draw a line to where open becomes shared or where the spectrum evolves? I met people who are on the opposite side of these options. Someone say, don't mix open and shared because people won't understand. others instead said, well, no, just talk about shared data, and then at some point, if you release all of the constraints, that shared data becomes open. What worked for you better?
I wouldn't even talk about access first. I would talk about the opportunities that a particular data resource creates. And then I would try to understand how to make those opportunities reality. And that might mean an internal project, that might mean working with someone down the supply chain, that might mean setting up a small innovation team in-house. And only when that value proposition is clearly understood, I would go and think about what would be the appropriate level of access of the data. And it might just as well be that you realize some data could be made open.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't have that conversation early on. It's really about, and to a certain degree, you have to do this. So if you think about how organizations engage in innovation, they organize, say, an internal hackathon, for example. For that hackathon, they will have to prepare some data, and they will have to share it with people who don't have direct access to those databases. So they will have to put in the effort and to think about the legal, technical, organizational implications of that.
So if they are diligent, the modality of access becomes a consequence of what they're trying to achieve, not the first decision they need to take.
Exactly. I think this is in my experience, this has been a good way to have those conversations. In the same time, though, you have sectors where publishing the data openly or some data openly about the business is regulated by law. So then I think there the conversation really has to be around how to make this less of a box-ticking exercise and explain the opportunities that this creates. Because the open or not open discussion is a different one. In other sectors, we're talking about sharing data across supply chains, or we're talking about cross-sectoral, cross-national data spaces now, which is something that the European Commission is exploring. So in those sectors, I think as long as you are driven by the opportunity rather than by whatever legal or technical questions, I think in the end the best mode of access will come as a result of these discussions.
Before I let you go, tell me what I find in your data sharing toolkit. What are the tools so that I open the box and I can immediately take and put it to test?
So we're very proud of this. We've been working on it for the last 6 to 9 months. So it's an introduction into data sharing, the way we understand it, with an overview of the different stakeholders in the space. So not just organizations that hold data or problem solvers for business challenges, but also intermediaries like I was in this context, or like you guys are as people who are going to build this data sharing centers. We go through a number of challenges and opportunities, and we present specific resources, which are documents that we have created in Data Pitch or in related programs, which are templates or checkboxes or case studies, specific stories that illustrate one particular element in this data sharing innovation space. So I hope you enjoy it, and we're very grateful for any sort of feedback. Because it was the very first time that we tried to bring together all the things that we have learned along the way in the last 3 years, and we hope it would be an enjoyable and useful read for the community.
Would you like to share with our audience where it's best to find you, on Twitter or on the website?
So the Data Pitch program has a website which is called datapitch.eu, and you can find an online version of this toolkit on the website, available from today. And we will also be holding a few webinars and talks in the next months to basically disseminate these lessons learned more broadly.
Okay. Thanks again, Elena.
Thank you.
And good luck with future work in this space. I'm sure you're not going anywhere, right?
Not very soon.
Bye-bye.